was a period of time where my dad got really interested in human sexuality, and he was a sex therapist. He was certified in everything. And of course, when you're at that age, you're really curious. And I would go downstairs and read all these sex books, all these books about sex therapy and sexual behavior. And so again, like I kind of knew what was clinically normal. So if friends would talk about something, I'd be like, oh no, that's totally normal. You know? Yes, penises are supposed to do that, you know.
Oh man, you were the movie on Netflix before there was the movie Sex Education on Netflix.
Like, yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah. You're like, I will tell you how this is. Give me $5. Give me $5, and I'll tell you how to make it better.
Yeah. I remember like years later, I told my parents that, like, and my parents were like, "You did what?" They had no idea. So.
My name is Ashanti, and welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast, where men get real. Men of all ages and backgrounds come to this space to talk about these masks we wear. When we describe the mask, we're talking about the front of the mask being the things that we gladly let the world see, the things that we're talking a lot about, the things that we're sharing with people regularly. And the back of the mask are the things that we don't talk much about. Today, sharing his mask is Dr. Matt Englar-Carlson. Dr. Matt is a professor of counseling and director of the Center for Boys and Men at Cal State University, Fullerton. I'm going to take a look at his bio right now because I want to tell you there's some really beautiful things in here. But one of the things that he's done in his work is focusing on healthy, prosocial forms of masculinity, social justice, diversity issue, and also psychological training for parents and teachers. I think one of the things that I was really excited about in our conversation is that as he talks about how he got his start, you know, his dad was a psychologist. His dad used to have all these books around the house about healthy sexuality, and he began to help train his friends about what things were normal and not normal, because he was coming from facts as opposed to regular teenage banter in the back of the classroom. I mean, I'm wearing this name tag today. I went to San Lorenzo High School earlier today, which is the place where the Ever Forward Club was founded. And just walking around the campus just reminded me of my first year teaching and all the things that I was learning as I was trying to figure out how to be an educator in this world. You know, Matt, in our conversation, as we talked about not only the need for education to be really deeply centered around young people and how they learn and how they develop, we also had some good fun talking about what we keep seeing in our world with men who are not operating in a healthy way, who are hurt, boys inside who come raging out in some ways that somehow you wonder, man, this person must be really hurt inside. But to pretend every day that I'm just this tough specimen of man, and oftentimes it comes out in such sideways, such unhealthy ways. You know, Matt, in addition to being a psychologist and a professor, he also says that he probably has way more shoes than he should have. He's a cyclist, drinks coffee, like is an appreciator of donuts. like you should know that makes me really happy. And he's has a healthy addiction to yoga. Matt is a huge fan of music, from 60s bebop to 70s punk to 80s hip hop. And he tries to keep it really fun for his 3 kids. You know, sometimes these conversations really help us to really understand the deeper inner working of someone in their career. But even more so, it helps us just really understand the deeper inner workings of how we show up in the world in these bodies we were born in. Also, if you have not yet made a mask, you can do that anonymously online at millionmask.org. And as we approach this milestone of the first 100,000 masks, we invite you to be a part of that season of our work. There's a lot of excitement happening in early 2024 as we approach our 20th year anniversary of the Ever Forward Club. So stay tuned for ways that you can get involved and ways that you can be a part of this movement with us. Today's ironically because this is the season of giving and holidays and end of the year. If you are a philanthropist, if you're a person who is looking, how am I going to support some organization in this season? We invite you to consider the Ever Forward Club, who is the sponsor of this episode or the sponsor of this show, but also the sponsor of the work that we do in the world with the Million Mask Movement. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Matt. This won't be the last time we hear from him, but I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Matt Englar-Carlson. Dr. Matt Englar-Carlson, welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast. I'm so glad to have you.
I'm really glad to be here today.
For the sake of today's conversation, I won't call you Dr. Matt Englar-Carlson every time. I'm going to call you Dr. Matt. Would you let folks know what you want them to know about you before we jump into these masks?
Dr. Matt's totally fine with me. Let's see. I am a professor at Cal State Fullerton in the Department of Counseling, where I train therapists for the most part. And in terms of the work that I've done, I've spent close to 25 years or more really focusing on the health of boys and men, looking at kind of how boys and men seek help, how they do or don't do it. And if they do seek help, are the people on the other end actually able to help them when they actually do? And so I focused in that area in terms of the psychological realm, written a lot of books about it, but also have really focused on what I would now call healthy masculinities, what originally was called positive masculinity, which I believe a colleague of mine, Mark Kasalka, and I coined that term not that long ago. But I'm really interested in kind of healthy boyhood and what that looks like and how that's operationalized in kind of K-12 settings. And then more recently, I'm also the clinical mental health researcher for the men's mental health app Mental, which is the first app created for and by men. On top of that, I'm a father. I've got 2 kids and engaged father. I'm an active kind of athlete in terms of cycling and doing yoga. And I'm also a department chair recently too, which means I'm taking on an administrator role.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I guess, right? But yeah.
Well, I'm excited for this next chapter of this work, right? And thank you for the work you're doing. I think this conversation, as we talk about our own masks, I imagine that the historical context of why you do the work you do, I feel it already, the deep resonance in how this came about for me. Because I was not planning to be doing this work. My plan was to be rich, that was my plan. So this nonprofit stuff was not in Ashanti Branch's plan, but it was in a higher being than me that said, this is where you need to be. And so I'm thankful that I listened and I answered the call. Kind of like, Joseph Campbell talks about it in The Hero's Journey, right? This idea of like, we're all called to some journey that is scary and sometimes seems like not for me. Like, well, what do you mean? And then when we decide to answer it or we fight it, and that's what the masks are, like a way of us being more of our full self and knowing that we have a society that tells us, no, that's not going to be okay here. And so you begin to like craft this being that how you need to be in all these different places.
I really resonate with what you just shared because I think that I think my upbringing is somewhat unusual in the sense that I was very close to my father, and my father was a psychologist and a school counselor, and he was my school counselor actually. And so for the most part, I grew up in a family of feelings and learning about feelings and seeing these things enacted in my classroom and whatnot. And yet I also kind of could see the disconnect between like what I was learning and what I was experiencing on the playground and with my friends. And so I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think at an early age, I kind of knew that it was all bogus. I mean, like I kind of had this impression that what I was supposed to do and wasn't really how I felt on the inside.
Ooh-wee. Well, I have a couple of questions that are popping in my mind, but I'm gonna resist the temptation. For the mask, it's opportunity for you and I to share our mask, and as a guest, you get to decide who goes first. So either you want me to go first and share my mask, or you feel called to go first, and whatever you decide is going to be perfect.
I'm happy to go first. I appreciate the offer as a guest, and to kind of see where that goes. So yeah, sure, I can go first.
So just show the front of the mask and then share the words you wrote and anything you want to say about them. And then I'll share the front of mine and then share the back.
Here's my mask. Hopefully you can see it there.
Yeah.
I've never claimed to be a very good artist, of course, but you know, the words I have on the front of my mask is engaged, carefree, and together. And I'm also really conscious of the fact that the bottom of my mask says my age is 52. And I'm really aware that I've worn different masks in different decades of my life. And that I wouldn't have done this mask when I was 30. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. You wouldn't do it, or the words would be different?
Yeah, I would definitely do it. I would definitely do it. But I think the words would have been different. You know, I think that I think the words would have been different. And I think some of it, I mean, some would be the same, but I realize that there's a way that maybe age, at least in men, it softens you a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that. It makes me think about that. Like, I'm trying to think what episode there was. I was thinking about how to like write words that I haven't written in a long time, or maybe I was going to project like back to my teenage self and like what I was showing. And today's image, I don't know what I drew. I have no idea what I drew, so I'm going to just show it because it's kind of out there. I was trying to draw some kind of, yeah, I don't know, tell you the truth, what I was drawing, but the words I wrote for today, serious, caring, passionate. And I think if I put them in that order, it's probably like when I'm like trying to get stuff done and I'm trying to like move things along, like the serious part of me, and maybe even caring sometimes shows up last, right? Like this passion of this hard work, of this work, which was big, right? Like we have a big goal of collecting these 1 million masks, but like sometimes it feels like a weight, right? And the pressure of like trying to do something important that I think is important in the world, that I feel like I was called to do in the world. And the seriousness of how I take it, of every time I see a student who is self-harmed, or I see another student who has gone and harmed others with this emotional, even the senator the other day who called out some guy on the floor of Congress, like, hey, you want to fight right here? Like, what? Like, I have so few words for even just that ridiculousness, but also like it's the training that keeps happening from adults, unhealthy, socially unhealthy, emotionally unhealthy, maybe physically totally fine. But the way this shows up in the world is this behavior that is like, what is going on here? Like, I mean, like as a teen, I never watched any congressional hearings, right? So maybe it's always acted crazy like this. But that kind of stuff is like, okay, what are we helping young people understand? How we resolve problems, how we resolve conflict, if these people are still doing this kind of behavior? And so I think, anyway, that's just that's what I feel, that energy coming forward, like that idea of like, and I think, but deep down, I come to this work from a sense of caring, like caring for the younger me who didn't get seen or heard or was trying to just survive, you know? And so that's the front of my mask today.
It's funny, as you said, what you shared, because Wick, you see the back of my mask, because it resonates with what you just shared. But I think even what you just said, like I did see that this week too, and I saw that, and I think the younger me probably would have a less compassionate view of that interaction and would be outraged in a different kind of way. And I think now, when I see that, what I see actually is like I try to see behind what is that, like. It's a front, and what behind that is pain and sadness, because no one who's happy acts that way.
Yeah, pain and sadness. Yeah, I as a former administrator at a middle school, you went to administration at a college level. As a former administrator in a middle school, I've seen kids who, when the safety of an adult comes to a battle, you see that blowfish type mentality, like, right? Like before you got down the hill to where this thing was happening, they were not in that mode. And as soon as the adult shows up, a little bit of freedom of like, and then all the words are popping up. You're like, what's going on here, right? Like, and you realize, okay, this is I got a little protection here. I got a little protection and safety behind this pain, right? There's a pain in here, but I need to let some of this out, and so I'm gonna let it out in an attacking way. And so anyway, I see it happen with our young men and boys all over. I mean, and you probably see it in your work too. Like, our jails are full of men. Full of men, and so we either something's going on with men, or we taught them things when they were little boys that then they become adults who don't know how to like back off, or the ego gets so engaged that they have a hard time, you know. So I feel that. Anyway, that I just saw that thing yesterday, so my mind is still just kind of like figuring out what I want to say about it in the bigger sense of this work. Because anyway, but that's the front.
Yeah, but I think as you say that, Ashanti, it makes me think, you know, it's this way in which it reinforces this narrative and this kind of belief that A, that's an appropriate way to respond to people, and B, it also builds this piece around not having a lot of, I would say, compassion or a lot of empathy for what's happening. And so when we see young men locked up and we see, you know, violence is, you know, enacted by men towards other men and other people. And of course, not all men are violent, but we know most violent acts are committed by men. It kind of depersonalizes it, and we just don't have this belief that we see them as humans anymore, right? We see them as a narrative, and so it's very easy to write off kind of their pain as being self-inflicted, or the fact that they're not feeling pain. Like, because they're not showing us pain. What they're showing us is, like you said, it's the mask, it's the aggression, it's the posturing, it's the poise.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna let you get to your back. I think we could go. I feel like the conversation is ready to jump.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So my back, if you can see it, it says the weight of responsibility, grief, and shame. But the weight of responsibility is, I think, the biggest thing I have behind my mask, and how I carry that.
I mean, you named two that have been. First of all, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. The weight of responsibility. It's definitely one that I could have wrote. I feel that. Yeah, I feel that. I remember using it in that phrase. And I think, and it's not like a responsibility. I mean, I think when I think about responsibility, it's like you have a responsibility to do this, and I don't hold that context for myself. I think what I feel, and I think about the back of my mask, is I'll jump in there. It's like the weight, like it's the weight that I feel called. Like, you know, it's almost like a difference between like you must do this because like there's something riding on it, right? I mean, it is something riding on it. There's actually no way to get around it. It's a responsibility that I accept it. It's almost like there was a time in my life where I didn't care about these things, right? Like I was perpetuating the way I was raised to be a boy, a man in this world, not showing any feelings, not being healthy emotionally. Like I've been there. So this was not a thing to me. It's like, yeah, whatever. I don't hear what you got to say about none of that right now, right? And it wasn't until it became something that I was willing to take responsibility for, that I was willing to hear, that I really began to feel that weight too.
Yeah.
And I think the original weight was, why would I leave an engineering career to become a teacher? Like, why would I do that? Like, what idiot would leave this career? Like, this is how I was talking to myself and not calling anybody else myself. I was like, looking in the mirror, like, what is wrong with you? Like, what will possess you to think that would be something you should do? Let somebody else go and become a teacher. You've been poor before. You have worked hard, so you don't ever have to go back there. And you're going to take a profession where you can just maybe barely get by. Like, that's not why I went to engineering school, to get a barely paying job I can just survive. And I knew what teachers were going to get paid. And I think that, So I'm gonna hold that one as one of my words today. The weight of responsibility, and the other two that I put today were worry and self-doubt.
Yeah.
And I think that I didn't have a third one yet, and that's the one I needed. Because I think the self-doubt is also, can I actually do it? Like, I got this big dream. Okay, I know I feel called to it. I feel passionate about it. I care about it. I'm serious about it. And what am I missing? Because I think it should have happened a long time ago. In my mind, it's so important that this million masks should have happened 2 years ago, whatever. And I think that I sometimes think about that the weight of more lives that every time I see something happening with a young person, definitely a young man in this work, I'm like, how didn't we connect to that school sooner? How didn't we connect to that community sooner? And this is probably a community I've never even heard of, right? Like but in my mind, I'm like, I feel the responsibility to not let another kid go by unseen, unheard, Yeah.
I'm just thinking, Ashanti, like, there's as an engineer, there's a financial richness, but in a way, you're poor potentially with meaning, right? But in your new role, there's a richness of meaning and purpose, right? That like it, and I kind of feel like once you kind of know, and once you've seen it, I can't forget it. So I feel about moments of my childhood, because I feel like this weight of responsibility, I know when it began in a way, like, and it's at a young age, I can be aware of when I became aware of like injustice in the world, or when I began to see way different people were treated differently, and the way things were kind of said, and whether that's socioeconomic or racial, or just working or talking with my fellow friends who are men or boys at that time, like that weight around kind of like having my eyes open and not being able to close them.
What can you share what it was that kind of got you into someone who focuses on boys and men and healthy masculinity?
Yeah. It's a funny question, because I think that maybe it's not a funny question, but I had two engaged, loving parents who also had two children when they were very young, who I think were growing up themselves when they had young kids. And with my father, at least, like that weight of responsibility, I know I got that from him, because I know that he talked to me about like what it was like to be 24 and have two young kids and try to make things work, but I think that, I had this really close relationship with my dad, in the sense I was almost like his shadow. I would follow him around and do things. And so in some ways, it's not surprising that I would go into psychology, because he was a psychologist. And my parents always said, like, in a way, do whatever you want to do, right? But to me, I feel like the die was cast at a young age. But my early exposure was in women's studies and feminism and gender studies. And I feel like, honestly, as a early professional, I was a school counselor, and I focused much more on girls and their moms, honestly. But I think when I began to see clients myself, and kind of my clinical training in my PhD program, I began to work with men. Super enjoyed it. Found that I could relate to their stories. I found in some ways like the work wasn't that hard, if that makes sense. Like, because I knew the narrative, and I would have guys who came in acute distress, who were contemplating kind of harming themselves or killing themselves, who weren't coming in for preventative work, right? They were coming in with 5-alarm fires, and but they would stay with me, and they would stay engaged in individual or group work, and they would emerge a much better person. And I found that really rewarding. And as I began to look around, I kind of recognized that there were so few people out there who seemed to maybe understand the world of masculinities. And yet there was this incredible amount of men and boys who needed help, who in a way weren't getting what they needed. So in that area, it's like I you know, as much as I always say, like, I had a good relationship with my dad, I think it was also complicated. Like, as I got older and I learned more about him and his life, I had a lot more empathy for the drive that he felt he had to provide for people. I feel like he was a workaholic. What I consider loneliness, I consider him to probably be a guy who probably didn't have a lot of friends. And yet I think he craved them and people liked him a lot. But his inner world, it felt to me, was unexpressed. And I think in some ways, as much as people think I'm my dad's shadow, and my dad passed away about 6 years ago, and as much as I feel like I'm in his shadow, I feel like in many ways I live my life to not be like him, to kind of carry myself in a different kind of way, and to be like, I grew up in a family that heritage-wise was Swedish. And so there was a bit of stoicism around it, around like, you took care of yourself, you got stuff done. And even though my dad was a psychologist, I always felt like he wasn't terribly emotional. And so I learned to get stuff done, but I realized that I wanted to have a much more emotionally connected life.
I have a question around that, and in terms of like how you, with a dad who is, you said psychologist, right? Psychologist?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Psychologist, yeah.
Like in a community when you were with your peers and you were seeing like maybe they weren't always being open and honest or fully, or maybe they came to your house and they're like, wow, they're having real conversations here. I don't know. Did you ever see the juxtaposition between how you saw the world as a young man who probably had, well, I guess I should ask the question. Did you have more room to talk about your feelings in your home?
I think I did. And I think like there's a, way, maybe I would call it empathy by proxy, if that makes sense. Meaning that I understood what my dad did. And I grew up for the most part in a small town in kind of rural Wisconsin. That was kind of between Milwaukee and Chicago. So urban areas were nearby, but it was a small town. And everyone knows each other in a small town. And essentially my dad was the town therapist.
Okay.
So I knew what he did, and I knew that he obviously wouldn't share what he did, but I knew what he did. And he would see my friends, like they would tell me at like, oh, I saw your dad last week, realizing that he was their therapist, I kind of felt like I understood what he did, understood kind of that people experience pain. I feel like in a weird way, like the things you didn't talk about, whether it was addiction or alcoholism or kind of schizophrenia in one's family, or even sexual abuse, or just things like this that I knew that no one would ever talk about at age but I knew those things existed.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had this understanding around this is the world. And oddly enough, part of it was my dad collected a lot of books. And when my parents would go to bed, I would just sit and look through a lot of the books. So I would read all these things and have an idea in a way, like, as an adolescent, you kind of ponder, am I normal? And I would look it up. Like I would get the clinical answer, like clinically, I'm normal,
Did you ever share these nighttime reading lessons with your friends the next day? Did you ever share them?
Yeah, there's a funny thing. I think this is really funny, but there's a period of time where my dad got really interested in human sexuality. And so he was a sex therapist. He was a family therapist. He was certified in everything. And of course, when you're at that age, you're really curious. And I would go downstairs and read all these sex books, right? All these books about sex therapy and sexual behavior. And so again, like I kind of knew what was clinically normal. So if friends would talk about something, I'd be like, oh no, that's totally normal. Yes, penises are supposed to do that,
Oh man, you were the movie on Netflix before there was the movie Sex Education on
Yeah,
Netflix. Like,
yeah, kind of
yeah,
like that.
yeah. You're like, I will tell you how this is. Give me $5. Give me $5, and I'll tell you how to make it better. You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I remember like years later, I told my parents that, like, and my parents were like, "You did what?" They had no idea. So,
well, that sounds like healthier than what happened in the back of algebra class, because I'm sure the stuff that these guys were talking about was a bunch of nonsense.
yeah,
And I bought it. I bought it. Well, I sat there, finished my math work, and I just was all ears to all the ridiculous weekend escapades that they had.
yeah,
They
yeah,
would talk about, and nobody was giving us any clinical information. It was all Oakland nonsense. You know what I mean? So,
yeah,
um, thank you for sharing that. Thank
yeah,
you
yeah.
for sharing that. As a professor, and I imagine as you're seeing college students and these are new college students. Well, I say new, like post-pandemic college students who have experienced the world in so many different ways, from whether they went to senior year of high school, or depending on where they were in the mix, right? Or they didn't go to, they missed half of their high school development ages. How, and with all the rhetoric out in the world, right? There's plenty of rhetoric out in the world about, oh, you're just trying to make men talk about feelings so you can make them not men, or not make them into women, and all these other narratives that are out there in the world. How are you experiencing college students today in terms of their ability to be able to sit with the dissonance, right? With like,
That is such a good question, and I think that, like, because one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, for example, are men changing, or are they different? And what my response to that is that men have always been changing. Like, we've always been changing, we've always been evolving in a way, because gender and gender roles and masculinities is a reflection of the contexts in which we live, which are never static. Right? They're always evolving and changing, and and I like to say, like I know the world of my father, right, who grew up kind of the son of a mason outside of Chicago. To me, right, the son of a psychologist, right, grew up in the Midwest. To my son, who grew up in California, right, and our worlds are very different in terms of what we experienced, and I think what I would really say is, like, there is a greater maybe understanding that, oh, men have feelings, again, which they've always had. Like, we've always had feelings. But now there's an opportunity. So some view this notion of kind of men opening up as an opportunity, and others view it as like essentially a disgrace, right? As a loss, right? And I see what I see with young people is, like, I truly don't believe as a society we've come to grips yet with exactly what the pandemic was, in terms of how it impacted our social structures, everything from family structure to work structure to engagement. But I think what I see is that we do have a population that essentially lost out, and I don't mean as a less than. I mean, I really mean it from like a social perspective. Like, they lost out kind of engagements in socially that they used to kind of have, and the relationships they got, right, they were mediated through media. So phones and computers, and I always try to look at kind of like not the less than, like the benefit of it, because I didn't grow up with this, right? Like, I didn't grow up with a phone, right? I grew up with a rotary phone, right? um, but I understand, like, the connectivity that the young people kind of have today, and the ability to kind of access information differently. And so what I do see is, in higher ed, at least, I see men coming in. Again, this is a generalization, but potentially not as prepared as they could be, and still kind of struggling with this ability to ask for help, whether that's tutoring or social support. and the support around the awareness of kind of how the pandemic shifted their lives. But at the same time, I see that there is a more openness than ever before to talk about mental health, like to talk about it and say, like, I'm struggling. And again, I guess even where we started, and then if someone says I'm struggling, do we have then the people around who know how to help?
And I wonder even deeper than that question is like, not only do we have the people around to help, that when a young man says I'm struggling, can people handle it?
Yeah.
Can the people who say, why don't you talk to me more? Tell me how you're feeling, and then I do. Can you handle it? Can you not make it try and look like it does when your best friends emote, that it's coming out in a different way? It's going to look different, right? I'm not going to be able to be at a restaurant letting these feelings out. I need to be in a park by the ocean, somewhere where I can like, cause it's going to come out of my body in a different embodiment, because I haven't had a lot of practice doing it, right? I haven't had a lot of practice being not in control, or being able to not have all the answers or have it all figured out.
I was gonna say, as you say that, what makes me think is that, like, I think what we also have to realize is that when someone says I need help, right, and they want to emote, we have a certain idea of what that's supposed to look like, right? And it's supposed to be like a interpersonal, face-to-face, like, I emote, and if I show emotion, I'm supposed to show emotion and feel it in a moment with you. Then you're supposed to do something, right? But the reality is, like, sometimes I emote on a bicycle. Like, sometimes I feel my strongest feelings when physically my body is being pushed and it kind of breaks down a wall, right? Sometimes I feel when I write a journal, or I sit down and I kind of silence my thoughts and like let the stuff pour out. Like, and we have to also recognize that is also emoting, and that also is emotional vulnerability. And we also know that actually has meaning and is effective.
For real. Yeah, I can't even say anything about that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that perspective, because I think that there's such a need for that. There's such a need for what I've seen is, I was an advice principal at a middle school, right? So what I know that some teachers were expecting is what their ideal student would do to get help, right? You come in at lunch, you come in quietly, you have your little notebook there, you ask a question. And I know that's not how the kid I was. And some kids are like, hey, I need help. And then the teacher's mad because he wasn't respectful in how he asked for help. And now it's becoming a question about how you ask the question. And now he's like yelling back at the teacher because you don't want to help me. You don't. And then now he's in my office because he's mad because he got kicked out of class, got a referral. And we're like, well, where did this start from? Wait, hold on, slow down. Let me get back to you were asking for help. And then tell me how this happened, where you now have a referral and you kicked out of class. Like, and how many ways do we in the education profession, and I'm on the K-12 side, the secondary, it's like we expect students to emote the same way they may have as a student. And if you were a good student always, it may be hard to deal with a kid who hates your class, and maybe you too, like if you don't have the patience to deal with a kid who really could care less about your class, the subject, anything, you take it personal, there's going to be a disconnect there, and I think that education already has enough barriers to like then make it like, oh, you don't like my English class, and now I'm taking it personal, and a kid can feel when you're treating them a different way. They can feel it. I mean, it's not, you don't need words. You just need how you look at me, right? How you stay away from me or come close to me,
Yeah, no, I see that in like, it's kind of this way in which you kind of say, like, I'm willing to help you as long as you accept my version of help. Like, and one of the things I do on my campus is I train faculty how to mentor students of color, particularly first gen students. And when I started doing this, I would hear a lot of people kind of say something to the effect of, my office is open. People know where it is. If they want to come, I'll be there. Right. And I would like to think on my campus, at least we've learned to change that, which is adaptability, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, that's not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Like that may cut it for someone who looks like me, right?
Yeah.
Who's white
Yeah.
and male and privileged and understands the way universities work and office hours work and things like that. But for a lot of people, that does not work. And I think even as a school counselor, like I learned really at a very young age that sitting down with the boys and kind of like, putting my chair across him and saying, what's going on, was not going to be as effective as saying, let's go for a walk, or let's go shoot hoops, or, teach me how to throw a curve, or so something like that. That just, we broke the mold of kind of this very rigid way of what help is supposed to look like.
So powerful, so powerful. And our hope is on these college campuses with our work with the movement is like, how do we inspire young people to say, oh yeah, I'm not alone. It's not just me.
Yeah.
Other people are probably going through it too, but they've got good masks as well. And so maybe I can, I was at North Carolina State last week doing a presentation, and last school year, they had 13 suicides on their campus, and 13. And I found it out like the end of my presentation. So I didn't even have that context when I went into my presentation. Otherwise I would have spoke more about this idea of this. I mean, we talked about the mask, which is exactly what happens. Right. And I think in our work, and so far this year they've had 2. And I don't know the velocity and the frequency of the ones last year compared to this year, but there's some needs for students in that campus to really begin having healthy ways of talking about it and knowing that it doesn't, that it's normal. It should be normal to talk about it when you're hitting that level of overload that you feel like you don't know where to go. And I think that's what our work is trying to do too. So
no, I mean, if I may say something about that, Ashanti, because it kind of strikes a chord of something that I care about a lot, which is the death by suicide rate in this country for men is epidemic proportions, and it's been that way for a long time. And people either don't care, didn't know, or they knew and didn't care. And just on top of that, I also think that's part of masculinity, right? Which is part of being tough is to encourage people not to care, right? It's to encourage you. Like part of being a strong man is to demand respect. And so people don't ask you how you're doing, right? And so it allows you to wear the front of that mask, whereas the inside you're hurting. And the reality, at least what I've discovered for over many decades, is that, this notion around suicidal ideation or this way in which men think about harming themselves is probably a heck of a lot more normative than we're aware of. Like, it's quite normal for men to kind of, when they're experiencing distress, to look at suicide as being an option. And it doesn't always mean that they actually want to not be here anymore. What it means often is they just don't want to feel that pain anymore. And then that absence of people asking, though, like saying, Ashanti, how you doing? You're looking like you're having a tough time. And we're so afraid we're going to ruffle that guy's feathers or we're going to break protocol. But the reality is that most guys, when asked directly and also kind of said like, and I care about you, right? That is a lifeline. And I think even the work with mental that we're doing, like that app comes out of the founder who lost 2 of his closest men in his life to suicide. Right. And it's one of those things that I'm quite bullish about these days, which I'm not going to be quiet about.
Can you tell us a little bit more about mental? And maybe we'll, as we wrap up this time together, and it won't be our last time together. I know, I believe it. But I want to hear about the app, and maybe definitely as people who are listening, we want to make sure we share that out there. What is the name? What is the full name of the app?
It's Mental. So if you go to the App Store and put in Mental, it'll pop up, and it is an app that comes from some of the founders of the Calm app. So people know Calm really, really well. And one of the things that we know about Calm is that 90% of the people using Calm are women or identify as female. And so it wasn't really reaching men. And so when we look at men's mental health or men's health, or but I would say men's happiness in general, is that a lot of the things that we do as a society and even as a health provider doesn't work. And so we built this from the ground up, which is kind of looking at how do we kind of use men's ways of being, whether it's male humor, it's funny, right? But it has routine, has inspiration, but it has protocols built in that it can be part of your day, things you can do part of your day as a way to kind of get you to kind of strengthen your mindset and to kind of really work on things you want to work on. But it's not going to be like an eat your veggies approach, or everyone has to go to therapy, right? It's this middle way, which is recognizing that there's a healthy way we can talk to men and engaging that part of guys who actually want to do better. So for me, it's really exciting because it's an interesting way to what I would say is reach a population that is just not being reached.
And I actually have it. I when I opened it, I was like, it says update. So I mean, I already have it. And now I need to make sure, I don't know where I was in the process of getting in it, but okay. So I'm in there. I'm about to be in there. And we have our circle with the young men today at one of our middle schools. And I think, and we have our a circle we meet with young men on the December 3rd. We have a community circle of young men, and we're going to I'll get more information from you so I can have something ready for them. I think it is so critical that young men have a space where they can go at their pace. When they join the Ever Forward Club, we're asking them every week how you're doing. Check in on a scale from 1 to 10. Even if you lie, we're asking you. So and we're going to ask you every week, right? It's every week the check-in is around how you're doing, how you're feeling. And some young men can hide it either, better than others. But we always want to make sure they get seen. And you were asked. And so when we dig in deeper, like, hey, you've been here 12 weeks. We've been asking every week how you're doing. Why didn't you say something? And knowing that it's not to shame them, knowing it's to say, okay, you just didn't feel comfortable. You didn't feel safe. You didn't feel like the circle was ready to hear your truth. And so how do we just keep making sure they can see them, see that sometimes the ask is going to look different. And sometimes the way I can respond may also look different,
No, but you touch on this concept that is so critical, which is this notion of mattering. Like, do you matter? Right. And the fact that you see young men, and they may not be the star of the group. They may have never said a word, but the fact that you see them and you say, I see you, that matters. Right. And I think health is tied to that. It's tied to kind of recognizing that people see you, that you feel validated, so I love as you know, I love the work you do and I love how you do it. And I think it's a great example too of you altered the way in which you tailored your approach to men, which is you gave something to them that this is language. I've done this in my class too, by the way. We do the masks in class. Nice. And it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to see it.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Huge. So just as we close, is there anything that I didn't ask that would be helpful for people listening to know, just in terms of not only the work you're doing, either some new research you're working on, or is there anything that you want people to know about this work, or where they can get more information from what you're writing about it, and wherever you want to let people know who are really hearing this?
I love that question, and I appreciate it. And I think that, like I said, I'm at Cal State Fullerton. I have the Center for Boys and Men, which is kind of an outreach center I work with. I also work with the American Psychological Association on their Boys and School Task Force, which is a way of kind of working with K-12 educators and kind of giving them information about the needs of boys and male adolescents. And I think that, I guess I'll leave it at this, is when often I get asked a question like, where do I think the state of things are? And that might be the state of kind of men's health or men's mental health in general. And, as you know this too, there's been blips over the years that felt like were important that maybe weren't sustained. And so I often use this notion: is it a moment or emotion? or a movement, right? Is it a motion or is it a movement? And I feel like we're in a movement stage. Like we're in a stage where things are actually moving. And the reality is that, you can either stand and watch, but either way, you're going to be swept away by the tides right now because society is changing the way we talk about gender, and even our talking about gender comes from society changing, comes from social structures, financial structures, and and so again, like I feel it's incredibly empowering work that you're doing, and then for other people who are listening, it's like the work that they're doing, which is engaging with young men and adult men and parents and teachers, and just advocating for kind of the humanness of boys and men.
Dr. Matt, it has been a pleasure to be in this conversation with you. I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to the next opportunity for us to do something with the center, to do something at Fullerton's, wherever that these seeds can be planted in wider fields. I'm here. I'm here for that work.
I appreciate that. And thank you for what you do. It means a lot to me. And whenever I see you, I get a smile on my face, and I know I'm going to be engaged in a different way. So,
well, I feel well engaged and I feel deeply connected in this work. So folks, look, Dr. Matt and I, we shared our mask publicly. You don't have to do that. You can share yours anonymously at millionmask.org. And you can see thousands of other people who have also from around the more than 30, 40 countries around the world who've also made masks. So, but maybe once you get courageous and you make a mask, maybe you'll find a family member, a friend, somebody you care about and make one with them. And then really see if you can take your conversation and connection deeper. Dr. Matt, it's so good to have you here on the Taking Off the Mask podcast. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The Taking Off the Mask podcast is produced by Ryan Louie and graphics by Kelly Wong. Guests are managed by Dan Paloma, and the podcast is edited by Samuel Matingo. We'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of the creation of this podcast, and for every guest that has been a part of the show, you are now a part of the Taking Off the Mask family. The Taking Off the Mask podcast is brought to you by the Ever Forward Club, and if you like what you've heard today, please subscribe, write a 5-star review, and share this with someone. We look forward to having more conversations that matter. And please remember, there's more to you than anybody can see by just looking at you.